Today we're going to be installing the intercooler along with all the intercooler piping for this LS Swap 1972 Challenger. The engine in question is a 5.3 LS. And the turbocharger that you can see here on the side is an eBay 7875. With a similar size turbo, I've made almost 600 horsepower on a 4.8 liter LS on 35-inch truck tires. With more boost on a 5.3 LS on 26-inch tall tires, I should be able to make even more power than that. So in order to make the tuning a lot easier, we're going to need to install an intercooler. Last time I didn't install one. This time we're definitely going to be installing one. So the intercooler in question is this eBay $95 intercooler, or maybe even less. I believe it's a 25-inch core, and I don't know what the total dimensions are, but they fit in between here and there, so it's probably going to be close enough for what we need. It's already more or less in the general area, but there are a few things that we have to keep in mind. The first of which is that we actually need this little bracket that's supposed to go on the car, and this ties in the entire grill section and it puts it exactly where it needs to go. If we try to install it as is with the intercooler where it's at, we can see just how far we are from getting it bolted onto the car. We can't necessarily move the intercooler any closer to the inside of the car because the radiator actually sits right here, and we don't want to move the radiator any closer to the engine because we're already going to be very tight with space right here as it is. Another problem is that we need this lower mounting hole in order to hook up the front valence, and that keeps the valence from kind of twisting and doing its thing. So whatever we build, we have to keep this lower section, and aside from that, this bracket is actually the supporting pillar between the top and the bottom of the core support. So whatever we cut out, we've got to put back in one way or another. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and bolt on the bracket where I think it needs to go, and we're going to cut off whatever we don't need. I've unbolted this from the top part of the bracket, and I've decided that I'm going to cut it right there because we're still going to be keeping that bottom hole. But if you actually pay attention, you can see that the sheet metal actually gets wider when you go up a little bit further on top. So I gave myself another 1/4 inch from where the sheet metal gets wider, and that's where we're going to make our cut. I went ahead and I cut the bracket, but we seem to have an issue here. As you can see, the holes where this guy bolts onto, they're elongated. So this guy can move up and down about 1.5 inches or so. So the only way I'm going to be able to finish building this out is if I install the valence. The only way to install the valence is to install the fenders. So let's go ahead and throw the fenders on and install the valence and see if we can get this guy bolted up. So I've got the front end all assembled minus the headlight buckets and the headlights. Like I mentioned, this is a 72 Challenger and these are 72 fenders, but I'm also in the process of converting this car to look like a 1971. So we're changing out the fenders to 71 style fenders, and I've already got the headlight bezels to match that 71 car. The rear has already been converted, so by the time I'm all done with the front end, it's going to look like a 71. That being said, I don't have any of the grill pieces, I don't have the bumper, and I don't have the headlight buckets and bezels installed currently, but that's not going to affect what we're going to be doing over here. So here's a little bracket that I told you that I was going to cut down, and from here to here we have plenty of room now for the intercooler. What I did was I took this area right here and I drilled a hole, one on each side, and originally there was no hole, so I kind of just guessed on a good spot of where to put the hole. And what we're going to do now is I'm taking 2 of these flat plates. These are 2 inches by 4 inches, and they're going to get it bolted down about right here, just like that one is right there. And once I have both of them bolted on, I'm going to take this 1x1 square tube and I'm just going to lay it in here and figure out more or less where we think it's gonna look pretty good. And how I'm going to gauge it is I'm going to compare this to the bracket that we cut, and I'm going to try to get them at the same height, so that way I can take this angle iron, lay it on here, and so the back of this angle iron is going to get welded to the square tube that sits behind it. Once I get that height settled, I'll be able to weld the square tube to the plates, and then I'll be able to make some mounting brackets for the intercooler. So let's go ahead and just tack this up and see what it looks like. 3 minutes later, we've got it all tacked up. So we've got the 2 plates on the side. They're both bolted on. We're using the speed nuts on the back of it where I drilled out the holes. Then we used the 1x1 square tube. I just tacked it in one corner here, 2 corners on that side, try to get it as even as possible. I put in the 2x2, and I actually installed the 2x2 first because I used the front of the bracket to give me the total amount that I was going to move forward, and then from there back I installed the 1x1 square tube. Now that it's more or less where it needs to be, I'm going to tack it in a few more spots before I finish weld anything. There are going to be some areas that I won't be able to get to right now until I pull it off, but I just need it strong enough so that it can hold the weight of the intercooler. So I've got the intercooler sitting on top of the bracket, and basically that's going to give me the maximum height that I'm going to require in order for the intercooler to fit the way I want it to. So if we look at the top, this is kind of what we're looking at right now. This bracket's not perfectly flat, so it does make it look like the intercooler's a little bit slanted, but it is pretty straight. As you can see, I've got plenty of clearance between the top tab and the bottom of this bracket, or the top tab and the core support. So from here, I just need to figure out how far I need to be from the radiator. And the radiator, like I said, sits right here. A decent distance from the radiator would be like ½ an inch. So from here to here should be pretty good. So as long as I can get the intercooler to line up with the core support, I should be in good shape. From there, I just need to calculate how far these tabs are from the end, and those are about 1.5 inches. So in total, the intercooler should be 2 inches away from the radiator or more by the time I'm done with this. And there we go, we've got these two little tabs on here. I ended up using a 1.5 inch section of 2x2, the same 2x2 that I used on the center, and I made 2 of them. Then I figured out where the center of this bar was, and then figured out where the little tabs were on the intercooler. It looked like we were around 13 and 11/16 of an inch center to center, and then I welded on one, ran it over to the other side, welded in the other one, ran the marks all the way through, and then I ran a single mark across about 3/4 of an inch away from the square tube. Now at this point you could sit the intercooler and then run bolts underneath, but what I did instead is I found out that the thread pitch of the intercooler was the same thread pitch of the LS bolts. It's a metric thread pitch, and what I did was I grabbed extra long bolts and I cut the heads off, and now those are going to be studs. As you can see, one there and one there. Now that I've got the studs in place, a little bit of red thread locker, and then I can flip them upside down and set them into place right there. So to demonstrate this, I've got the intercooler and I've got the tube holes. I'm just gonna let it rest right there. And you can see one stud poking out of here, one stud poking out of there, and now the intercooler is pretty much in its place. The only thing left to do now is figure out what kind of brackets I'm gonna use for the top of here in order to fasten this to the core support or fasten this to this bracket that's right here. Now that I know where the intercooler is going to go, I don't need that top plate anymore, so I went ahead and I removed it. Now I'm going to take off the fender. I went and I picked up the driver's side 1970 fender, and I also picked up the driver's side bumper bracket. I couldn't find the one for the passenger side, so we're gonna keep looking out for that one. The one on the driver's side is right here, and it's gonna give me a general idea of how I'm gonna be able to run these pipes. The idea was to go around the bumper bracket and then go straight down, around, and then back up toward the turbo. But now that the bracket's here, I don't think that's going to be possible. So instead of worrying about this right now, I'm going to go ahead and swap out the fender from the 72 fender to the 70 fender, and let's see what it looks like. All right, so we've got the 71 fender installed along with the 71 headlight bezel. Now things are looking a little bit more complicated. Since this is a different design from the 72, we have a different bracket for the headlight buckets, and so we only have a limited gap between here and here, and so the gap that I thought that we had has been considerably reduced. Going through the front of this bracket doesn't seem to be a very good option, but if I'm careful, I can probably run a tube right around here, and it'll be, you know, somewhere like this and right there. The issue with running it like this is that now it's in the way of a filter, kind of like this one, except not this one, that was going to go from the turbo all the way out to the headlight bucket, which is going to go kind of like this. And if this pipe ends up being in the way, the filter is not going to be able to get bolted on, and I really want to run a filter on this car. After all, this is a street car, and street cars need air filters if you want them to last a decent amount of time. Another option is to just run this 45 instead of a 90, and that'll just make the curve start a little bit earlier, and it does get out of the way of the headlight bucket, but now I have to finagle around this little tab, the headlight bucket bracket, and of course the bumper. I'm about 3 inches higher of where I should be, so once I cut it, everything's going to drop about 3 inches. But if I had to compare between this and the 90, I am liking this one a lot better. So I'm just going to bite the bullet and cut this pipe and see where we end up. So I've got my 45 right here coming out of the intercooler, and as you can see, I am completely out of the way of the headlight bucket. Only problem is now that it ends up like somewhere over there, which is somewhere that I don't probably need to be. So what I think I'm going to do is I took another piece and I cut it exactly the same way. And mind you, this is all like eBay stuff. You can get the kit. I believe this one was like $80 or something for the whole kit. And I put a mark right here on the tube, and I think I'm gonna cut that tube, put another 45 on it, and change the direction so it'll start going down instead of out. By going down, hopefully it'll land me on the opposite side of this bracket, and then I'll have a straight shot down, allowing me to shape the pipe back and then up towards the turbo. Okay, so I've got all this assembled and it's starting to look good, but as you can see, I'm still about 3 inches away or so from hooking up to the intercooler, but I'm already hitting the front valence, so I've got to cut it down about 3 inches to get it to this point. But then I also need a coupler to go back. The reason I want to use a coupler instead of another 90-degree bend or something like that is because the couplers, the little rubber couplers, are a tighter radius than the 90s. The coupler saves you about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of space, and since I have to go down, back, and immediately go back up, it's going to be a lot easier to put 2 couplers together to do it than it is to get a coupler and a 90 or 2 90s. Now that I've got this all finished, I'm looking at it right now and I'm thinking the intercooler should probably go up another inch or so, just to be a little bit further away from this tab, and I'm hoping the grill will still fit after this is all put together. But I'll save moving the intercooler for later. Let's look underneath and see what we're working with. Now looking underneath, I've got the turbo right here, and then I've got the silicone coupler right here. And at this point, we could probably just take another 90 and then stick it on the outlet of the turbocharger, and then put a small piece of straight section from here to the other coupler, and probably call it good. Like, we don't have to do anything else. The issue, however, is that, and I don't know if you guys can clearly see that on camera, but we have no room between the compressor inlet and the fender, at least on half of it. This side we're completely open and we're fine. It's this side right here where we're gonna have a little bit of trouble. And it all comes back to the fact that I said that I wanted to put the turbocharger right where the high beam headlight is, but looking at it now, I don't think that's going to be possible. You see, I don't think I have enough room to scoot the turbo any further to the driver's side in order to center the inlet of the turbocharger with the high beam headlight. So I basically have 2 options. Either I move the turbocharger further out and line it up with the low beam headlight, so that way I still have a direct stream of air into the turbocharger, or I give up on the idea of running it into the headlights, just cut this section out, put a coupler on it, maybe point it down or something, and then put a filter down here somewhere like a cold air intake. If I was to move the turbocharger, let's say 6 or 8 inches over to the right, I'm not gonna have an issue with hooking it up to the intercooler piping. The hard part is basically done. I'm already here. So I'm not gonna have an issue with turbo fitment regardless of where I put it. The issue now is to decide, am I going to go through the headlights or not? So I'm gonna think about this for a little bit, and in the meantime, I'm gonna jump over to the other side. While I was looking at all the elbows that I had, I realized that I could use something like this. What's funny is that every time I see one of these, I'm like, what could you even bother using these for? Like, I understand 90s, I understand 45s, but a complete U? What could you guys even use that for? And now that I'm getting closer to getting this assembled, I'm starting to understand what all these U's are for. I ended up using one here, and I used one on the exhaust, and I'm starting to appreciate these a little bit more. So the idea is to fit this guy in between this hole that we talked about earlier, and then trim it right around there, and then hopefully I can get around the radiator right around here, but we're just gonna have to see. So this kit actually came with 2 U's, and it ended up working out a lot better than I thought. So this is 1/2 of that U, and as you can see, line it up there and more or less cut it in half, good to go. So this is what I've got so far. I took one of the halves from the U and I actually flipped it, turned it, and trimmed it a little bit, so that way I can make this turn around here. In reality, I might be a little too close, but you guys get the general idea. I could probably trim this guy a little bit more and then have it go that way just a little bit further. But as you can see, I've made it through the core support, and I tried to use the other half of the U right here, but as you can see, I end up a little bit too close to the exhaust side, and the way it's pointed out right now puts me directly where my accessory drive is heading. So I need something that gives me a slightly sharper bend. So what I ended up settling on was to use this 90-degree bend, but what I've done is I've actually trimmed it down to the point where it's only this big. Gave myself just enough room to roll a bead on this and then to put the coupler on. I believe one side's bigger than the other side, which I think this one's a shorter one, so I'll stick the shorter one in there. So now we've got the half U going this way, then we've got a 90-degree going that way. And before I get my head of myself, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with the carburetor. On my previous build, I used a low profile turbo hat with a 4-inch outlet, or inlet technically, coming out at a 45 compared to the carburetor. This hat is a Holly hat, and this has a 3.5-inch inlet. And unlike the 45 inlet that the other one has, this one has almost a straight shot into the carburetor. Speaking of the carburetor, this is what I kind of came up with. You guys have to remember that there is a coolant line that comes up here, goes across, and then ties into here. So if I have the intercooler piping sitting too high, I'm going to come in contact with the coolant hose. Not a good deal. And so what I ended up doing was I picked up two different adapters. I picked up a straight 3.5-inch to 3-inch coupler and then a 90-degree coupler. And originally we were thinking about running it straight, and it would come out this way and then make a 90, come out this way, tie into here. But like I mentioned, we do have this upper radiator hose that we have to navigate around. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take this radiator hose and just quickly install it so I can show you guys what's going on, and then lay it there. And then this little hose right here is for the steam port in the motor. Very important that you keep that. But as you can see, we've got to go under here and then across that way. So by using the 90, I can go straight down. By using an aluminum 90, I can go forward. And then by using like a 90-degree coupler, I can go that way. But I'm in a very precarious spot because I have a radiator hose to the left, I have an idler pulley to the right, and then underneath I have the belt, which is actually sitting on right now. So I've actually got to raise this fitting up about 1/2 inch or so in order to get it away from the belt. So assuming that I can trim this tube a 1/2 inch and bring it up, that just leaves a connection from here to here. Once I figure out where this goes, I can trim this guy back, and then we're going to use a 90-degree coupler, a regular 3-to-3, probably put it somewhere around here, and then from here I could actually run a straight piece of tube from here to here and then call it done. But as you guys might have guessed, there's still one component missing before we can complete the intercooler tubing, and that is the position of the blow-off valve. This actually reduces boost pressure on deceleration, so that when you let off the throttle, you won't get a bunch of pressure buildup in here. It'll blow it out, keep the turbo happy, keep the hoses happy, everything good to go. I have blown out hoses and tubes either from having the wrong spring in here or from not having it hooked up at all, so then vacuum wouldn't open it fast enough. This tube is a little short, but I can really just install this guy right here. The only issue is that instead of installing it straight up and down, I'm going to have to install it upside down because this guy is going to get in the way of the coolant hose and then it won't fit. So there's a lot of hearsay on the internet of whether you can install these upside down or not, and there's no reason why you couldn't install them upside down. I tend to not want to because moisture gets built up inside the intake track, and so by having it upside down, you'll have moisture pool up. But aside from that, there's really not a big deal. So this is going to be actually the first time I ever install this upside down. I have installed it sideways and straight up and down, but upside down I haven't yet. So this will be a first experience for me. Because the tube is so short, I can either install it closer to the intercooler side or closer to this 90-degree coupler. From there, I just have to add a tiny piece of tubing to go from this guy to that guy, and doing that should complete the post intercooler side of the intake system. Okay, so I think I messed up a little bit. As you can see here, I welded this pipe to that pipe because this one was too short, and I feel like I should have used a coupler instead, so that way it would look a little bit cleaner, but it's too late now. I couldn't use a shorter elbow because it was going to put the coupler too far back and the exhaust was going to melt it, so I had to run a longer pipe all the way to here just to avoid that. And pretty much the only reason why I decided to weld it was because I got a new welder that can do aluminum MIG welding with the spool gun, but I don't have nearly the experience to operate that correctly, and I put in way too much filler material. I actually went in and I cut it down with my lathe, so it doesn't look terrible now, but before I cut it up, it looked really bad. But it's got penetration and it holds and it does what it needs to do. So this pipe is pretty much now done. We've got the 90-degree here, we've got the T fitting here, we got the blow-off valve on top of that with the coupler, and then we've got the straight elbow that's going to go here, and then we've got the little elbow that's going to go here. In fact, those pieces are over here, not that one, just these two pieces. This little one goes there, and this bigger one actually goes in right here. So this was the big 90 that we were looking at earlier, and I made a couple marks to see where it would fit, and I trimmed off a lot more than I was going to, but it seems to fit really well now. And then from here, I just used the 90-degree coupler, which is right here. So let me go ahead and assemble this so you guys can check that out. So this is the charge pipe now fully assembled post intercooler, and like I said, we've got this guy right here where I welded it right there. I've got the T right down there, that's where my blow-off valve is. I've got the 90 that we looked at earlier. I've got the metal aluminum 90 that we looked at earlier, and then we have the 3 to 3.5 into the hat. The hat doesn't have a nut on it, and it's still kind of loose, but it lines up perfectly good to go. I need to order a band clamp that's 3.5 inches. I don't have that, so I just put that on order. But aside from that, the entire charge pipe post intercooler is now completely done, no problems. Now the only thing I need to do on this side is to run a hose from the blow-off valve to the intake manifold so it opens under deceleration. So aside from that, I've got the coolant hose that's supposed to go here, and I'm going to try to install it with one hand without completely ruining it. So I've got one side here, got the other side there. All right, so we've got the upper radiator hose where it's supposed to go, and then we've got the steam port hose right there, and there we go. The entire top of the engine is now completely done, and the only thing left to do now is to assemble the charge pipe that goes from the turbo to the intercooler, which is like going to be a very complicated view, and I think I'm going to make that out of steel, so I'll save that for the next video. As for the whole intercooler and the charge pipe situation, that's all done. This is going to be a custom piece that we're going to tackle in a separate video. If you guys have any questions on anything that I've done today, go ahead and post them in the comments down below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher signing out.